Elliot Harper pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped outside the staff lounge into the cool, quiet halls of St. Mercy Hospital. It was nearing midnight, the usual time when the world outside the hospital seemed to sleep, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional echo of hurried footsteps to keep him company. The night shift was predictable that way, always calm, yet somehow brimming with the unspoken possibility of something going wrong. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He fished it out, hoping for a text from Clara, but found only an automated reminder about his overdue car payment. Clara, his wife of 7 years, rarely texted him during his shifts anymore. It wasn't out of neglect, she was simply exhausted most nights, juggling their 5-year-old daughter, Lily, and the daily grind of her freelance work. They had settled into a routine, a rhythm that felt comfortable, if not thrilling. Tonight, however, Elliot felt an unusual pang of longing to hear her voice. It had been a rough week. A patient with a particularly harrowing prognosis had taken up much of his emotional energy, and he couldn't stop thinking about the fragility of life. Clara always had a way of grounding him, of reminding him of the joys they still had, even in their modest little home in North Carolina. And Lily, her laughter, her unfiltered view of the world, was the highlight of his every day. He smiled faintly, imagining her latest rendition of "Let It Go," belted out from the top of their couch just this morning. As his break approached, Elliot decided he'd call home to leave a quick message. It was a small tradition of his during night shifts. He'd whisper a tender goodnight to Clara, sometimes adding a silly note for Lily to hear in the morning. Tonight, he dialed the landline from the hospital staff phone, eager to keep the routine alive. The phone rang twice before it was answered. "Hello," came a voice, slurred and thick with alcohol. A man's voice. Elliot's grip on the receiver tightened. "Hello. Who is this?" he asked, his voice laced with confusion. The man chuckled, a low, mocking sound that set Elliot's nerves on edge. "Stay away from her," the man slurred. "She and your little girl are mine now." Elliot froze. The words hit him like a blow to the chest, the breath stolen from his lungs. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice rising despite his effort to stay calm. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, there was a long pause, filled only with the faint sound of movement on the other end. Then, just as Elliot thought the call might have disconnected, the man spoke again, his voice colder this time. "Don't come home, Harper. You're not needed here anymore." The line went dead. Elliot stood there, his pulse pounding in his ears, the receiver still pressed to his ear long after the call had ended. The words echoed in his mind, searing themselves into his consciousness. "Don't come home. She and your little girl are mine now." The hospital walls, once a comforting backdrop of familiarity, now seemed to close in on him. For a moment, Elliot told himself it had to be a prank, a cruel joke. Maybe a wrong number. Maybe. But how would someone know his name? And why had Clara's voice been absent? His mind raced, conjuring scenarios he didn't want to consider but couldn't ignore. He grabbed his coat and marched to the nurse's station. "I need to leave," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. "Something's come up." The charge nurse looked up, startled. "Is everything okay?" "I don't know," Elliot admitted. I have to go." The drive home was a blur. Elliot gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Every stoplight, every slow-moving car in front of him, felt like an eternity. His mind replayed the call on an endless loop, the man's slurred words, the ominous tone, the implication that something was horribly wrong. What if Clara was in danger? What if Lily? He couldn't let himself finish the thought. Instead, he tried to rationalize. Clara was cautious, always double-checking the locks before bed. Lily's favorite stuffed bunny, Mr. Flop, was probably clutched in her little arms as she slept soundly in her room. Everything would be fine. It had to be. By the time he pulled into the driveway of their modest 2-story home, his chest felt tight with dread. The house was dark, save for the porch light that cast eerie shadows across the yard. It wasn't unusual for Clara to go to bed early, but tonight, the stillness felt wrong, oppressive. Elliot stepped out of the car, his senses on high alert. The faint sound of crickets chirping was the only noise as he approached the front door. It was unlocked. His stomach twisted. "Clara," he called as he stepped inside, his voice echoing in the silent house. "Lily?" The living room was as they had left it that morning. Lily's drawings were still scattered on the coffee table, and the faint scent of lavender from Clara's diffuser lingered in the air. But something was off. The quiet was too complete, too unnatural. Then he heard it. A soft, muffled sound from upstairs. "Daddy," a small voice called, trembling with fear. Elliot's heart leaped. He bounded up the stairs two at a time, rounding the corner to find Lily standing in the hallway, clutching Mr. Flop to her chest. Her big, tear-filled eyes met his, and she pointed toward the master bedroom with a shaking hand. Elliot crouched down, his voice low and soothing. "Lily, sweetie, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Her lip quivered. "The bad man," she whispered. "He's in there with Mommy." Elliot's stomach plummeted. Every instinct screamed at him to rush into the bedroom, but he forced himself to stay calm for Lily's sake. He wrapped his arms around her, feeling her small body trembling against him. "It's okay," he whispered. "Go to your room and stay there, okay? Lock the door." She nodded, her tears soaking into his shirt as he carried her to her room. Once she was safely inside, Elliot turned back toward the bedroom, his jaw clenched, his fists curling at his sides. The muffled noises were clearer now. Voices. Laughter. And something else, sounds that made his blood run cold. His mind warred between rage and disbelief. This was his home, his sanctuary, and those were his wife and child. He approached the door with slow, deliberate steps, each one heavier than the last. His hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment before he twisted it and pushed the door open. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that stopped Elliot cold. The room was dimly lit by a bedside lamp, casting a golden glow over the crumpled bed sheets. At first, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Clara, his Clara, was there, her familiar silhouette stark against the warm light. But she wasn't alone. A man, a stranger, was with her. Shirtless, his back turned to the door, his broad shoulders blocking Elliot's view of Clara's face. Their movements were intimate, unmistakable. Laughter bubbled between them, the sound so casual, so alien in this room that was supposed to belong to Elliot. For a brief, terrible moment, Elliot froze. 1,000 thoughts screamed through his mind. Was this a nightmare? A cruel prank? Was he mistaken? But no. The smell of aftershave that wasn't his filled the air, mingling with the floral perfume Clara always wore. This was real. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. His fists clenched, the blood roaring in his ears as he took a step forward. The creak of the floorboard beneath his weight finally alerted them to his presence. The man turned first, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he locked eyes with Elliot. Clara scrambled to sit up, pulling the sheets around her, her face pale as though she'd seen a ghost. "Elliot," she began, her voice trembling. But he wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze had shifted to the man. He was tall, younger, with a careless sort of arrogance etched into his sharp features. Elliot didn't recognize him, but the smugness in his expression, quickly masked as he began to stammer an apology, ignited something primal inside him. "Who the hell are you?" Elliot's voice was low, cold, and lethal. He took another step forward, his broad frame towering over the intruder. "Look, man, the man stuttered, holding up his hands defensively. "I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Elliot snarled. "That this is my house. That she's my wife." Clara interjected, her voice frantic. "Elliot, please, let me explain." "Explain." He turned to her, his anger momentarily eclipsed by the raw betrayal in his voice. "You want to explain this?" Clara's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted between Elliot and the stranger, the guilt on her face confirming everything he needed to know. There was no mistake. No misunderstanding. Elliot's voice dropped, dangerously calm now. "Get out," he said to the man. The stranger hesitated, glancing at Clara as if for confirmation. She nodded weakly, and he began to gather his clothes, moving with an awkward haste as Elliot's glare bore into him. Elliot stepped aside, his arms crossed, as the man shuffled past. "Don't let me see your face again," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. The man mumbled something unintelligible as he disappeared down the stairs. A moment later, the front door slammed, leaving only Elliot and Clara in the charged silence of the bedroom. "Elliot," she began, but he raised a hand to stop her. "Not a word," he said, his voice trembling now, the anger cracking under the weight of what he'd just witnessed. "Not until you tell me how long this has been going on." Clara opened her mouth, then closed it again, tears brimming in her eyes. She looked away, her fingers twisting the edge of the bedsheet in her lap. "A few months," she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. Elliot felt as though the air had been knocked out of him. "A few months," he repeated, as if saying it aloud would make it less surreal. "While I've been working nights, providing for you and Lily, you've been doing this?" Her tears spilled over now, carving tracks down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It wasn't supposed to." "To what?" he interrupted. "To mean anything. To happen. Tell me, Clara, what exactly wasn't supposed to happen?" Clara's sobs grew louder, but Elliot felt no sympathy. Not yet. His mind was spinning, replaying every moment of their life together with new, bitter clarity. The nights she'd gone to bed early. The weekends she'd said she needed space to recharge. The increasing number of times her phone had buzzed with messages she'd claimed were from friends. It all added up now. "And Lily?" Elliot asked, his voice cracking. "Was she ever in danger? Did you ever?" He stopped himself, the thought too horrifying to finish. Clara's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with shock. "No. Never. I swear, Elliot, I would never let anything happen to her. She doesn't know anything about this." Elliot wanted to believe her. For Lily's sake, he needed to believe her. But the man's words from the phone call haunted him. "She and your little girl are mine now." What had he meant? Was this more than an affair? Who was he? Elliot demanded. "What's his name?" Clara hesitated, her lips trembling. "Aaron," she said finally. He's no one, Elliot. He doesn't matter." "No one?" Elliot's laugh was harsh, humorless. "He didn't look like no one when he was in our bed." Clara flinched, and for a moment, Elliot hated himself for the cruelty in his words. But the image of her with Aaron, their laughter, their intimacy, flashed in his mind again, fueling his rage. "I need answers," Elliot said, his voice steadying now. "How did this start? Why?" Clara shook her head, sobbing into her hands. "I don't know," she choked out. "I was lonely, Elliot. You were always working. We hardly talked anymore. And Aaron, he was just there. He made me feel seen." "Seen?" Elliot's voice rose. "Clara, I've always seen you. You're my wife, the mother of my child. Everything I do is for you and Lily. Don't you dare say I didn't see you." She looked up at him, her eyes red and desperate. I know. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like enough. And I hated myself for it, Elliot. I still do." Elliot stared at her, his chest heaving, his emotions warring between anger, heartbreak, and the faintest sliver of hope that this might still be salvageable. But he wasn't sure he could forgive her. Not yet. Not when the betrayal was so fresh, the wound so raw. "I can't do this right now," he said finally, his voice hollow. I need time." "Elliot, please," Clara begged, reaching for him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "I'm going to check on Lily," he said. "Stay here. Don't follow me." He left the room before she could respond, his footsteps heavy as he made his way to Lily's room. As he opened the door and saw her small form curled up on her bed, clutching Mr. Flop, his heart broke all over again. Whatever happened next, she was his first priority. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead as she stirred. "It's okay, sweetie," he whispered. "Daddy's here." But as he sat there in the darkened room, one question burned in his mind: was Aaron's claim on the phone just a drunken boast, or was there something more dangerous at play? Elliot sat by Lily's bedside long after her soft breaths signaled she was asleep again. His mind churned with unanswered questions, each one a blade twisting deeper into his chest. Who exactly was Aaron? How had this gone on for months without him noticing? And most pressing of all, what had that phone call meant? The words played on repeat in his mind, "She and your little girl are mine now." It wasn't the kind of thing an ordinary man would say, even in the throes of drunken jealousy. There was a possessiveness, a malice in Aaron's voice that Elliot couldn't shake. Something wasn't adding up. He rose quietly, his hand brushing Lily's hair one last time before he left her room. The hallway felt colder than before, the air heavy with the echoes of the confrontation in the bedroom. He hadn't spoken to Clara since storming out of their room, and part of him wasn't ready to face her yet. Instead, he made his way downstairs to the kitchen, needing distance and clarity. The kitchen was dark, save for the soft glow of the nightlight above the stove. Elliot leaned against the counter, his fingers gripping the edge as he tried to steady himself. He thought back to the life he and Clara had built, how they'd scraped together enough money to buy this house, how they'd decorated Lily's nursery together, how they'd dreamed of their future. And now, in a single night, it felt like it was all crumbling. He was reaching for a glass of water when he noticed something out of place. Clara's purse, usually hung neatly by the front door, was sitting open on the kitchen table. The faint glow of her phone screen caught his eye. Elliot hesitated. He wasn't the type to invade her privacy. But then again, she had already shattered the trust between them. With a deep breath, he stepped closer and picked up her phone. The screen unlocked with her usual passcode, their wedding anniversary, the irony not lost on him, and immediately opened to a text thread with Aaron. His heart clenched as he read the most recent messages. "Aaron, you didn't tell him, did you?" "Clara, no. He found us. It's over." "Aaron, it's not over unless I say it's over. We're not done." The next text made Elliot's blood run cold. "Aaron, if you try to cut me out, you'll regret it. Both of you." Elliot's hand shook as he scrolled further. The texts painted a picture he didn't want to see, months of clandestine meetings, stolen moments, and Aaron's increasing possessiveness. Clara's replies grew more hesitant over time, her tone shifting from infatuation to something that resembled fear. The final message was from an hour ago. "Aaron, I don't care what he thinks. You know where to find me." Elliot set the phone down, his mind racing. Clara hadn't just betrayed him. She had entangled their family with someone dangerous, someone who clearly didn't know how to let go. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, soft and tentative. A moment later, Clara appeared in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She paused when she saw him holding her phone, guilt flickering across her face. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elliot's gaze was hard as steel. "Enough," he said. "Enough to know that this isn't just some affair. This is a threat, to me, to you, to Lily." Clara flinched as if he'd slapped her. "I didn't mean for it to get like this," she said, her voice trembling. "Aaron wasn't supposed to, he wasn't supposed to be like this." "Then what was he supposed to be, Clara?" "A fling. Someone to keep you entertained while I was working my ass off to keep this family afloat." His voice rose, anger spilling over despite his efforts to stay calm. Clara shook her head, her hands wringing together. "I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking. At first, it was just nice to feel wanted again. But then he started getting possessive, showing up unannounced, saying things that scared me. I wanted to end it, Elliot. I swear I did." "Wanted to," Elliot repeated bitterly. "But you didn't." Tears streamed down her face. "I was afraid of what he might do." Elliot's jaw clenched as he absorbed her words. "Afraid enough to let him walk all over our marriage, but not afraid enough to tell me? To protect your daughter?" Clara looked away, shame written in every line of her face. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep him at bay until it just fizzled out." "Well, guess what, Clara?" Elliot said, his voice a razor's edge. "It didn't fizzle out. He's threatening you. He's threatening us. And now we're in the middle of his mess because you let him in." She broke down then, sinking into one of the kitchen chairs, her shoulders shaking with sobs. For a moment, Elliot considered walking out, just grabbing Lily and leaving Clara to clean up the disaster she had created. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not while Aaron was still a threat. "What else aren't you telling me?" he asked, his tone softer now, though no less demanding. Clara hesitated, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "He has photos," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Of me. Of us. He said he'd use them if I ever tried to cut him off." Elliot's stomach turned. The room seemed to tilt around him as the implications of her words sank in. "Photos," he repeated, his voice thick with disgust. "And you didn't think to tell me this before?" "I thought I could handle it," she said again, her voice cracking. "I thought if I just stayed quiet, he'd move on." Elliot leaned against the counter, his mind reeling. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about protecting his family from a man who had already proven he was willing to cross boundaries. "I'm going to fix this," Elliot said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "But you're going to tell me everything, Clara. Every text, every meeting, every threat. No more lies. No more excuses." Clara nodded, her eyes wide with fear and relief. "I'll tell you everything." "Good," he said, grabbing his keys. "Start writing it down. I'm going to make a call." "Who are you calling?" she asked, her voice small. Elliot's eyes were dark, unyielding. "Someone who can help. Someone who can make sure Aaron learns that he messed with the wrong family." As he walked out into the cold night air, Elliot felt a new resolve settle over him. He wasn't just a husband anymore, or a father. He was a man on the edge, ready to do whatever it took to protect what mattered most. The cold night air stung Elliot's face as he stepped outside, his breath visible in the faint light of the street lamps. He sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, his mind a whirlwind of anger, dread, and determination. His heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the sharp edge of resolve. Elliot reached for his phone, staring at the screen for a long moment before dialing a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered, gruff and wary. "Elliot?" "Mark," Elliot said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I need your help." Mark Sterling was an old friend from Elliot's time in the Marines, a man who had seen more than his share of dangerous situations. He'd retired years ago, setting up a private security business, but Elliot knew he still had connections, people who could dig deeper and act faster than the police. There was a pause on the line before Mark spoke again. "This about that drunk who answered your phone earlier? I had a feeling something was off when you told me about it." Elliot's stomach clenched. He had mentioned the strange call in passing when they'd caught up over the phone weeks ago. "It's more than that," Elliot admitted. "I need to know everything you can find about a man named Aaron. He's been threatening my family." "Threatening how?" Mark asked, his tone sharp. Elliot hesitated, glancing back at the house where Clara was likely scribbling down her sordid history with Aaron. "It's complicated," he finally said. "He's been involved with Clara. She says it's over, but he's not letting go. He's made threats. He knows where we live, and he's got leverage." There was a pause, followed by the sound of papers shuffling. "I'll look into it," Mark said. "Got a last name for me?" Elliot gritted his teeth. "Not yet. I'll text you what I can as soon as I get it." "Fine. But listen to me, Elliot, don't do anything stupid. You're not the same guy you were in the service. You've got Lily to think about now." "I know," Elliot said, though the reassurance felt hollow. "Just find me something. Fast." He hung up and leaned back in the driver's seat, staring at the house. It looked peaceful from the outside, but he knew better. It wasn't a home tonight, it was a battlefield. And the enemy wasn't just Aaron. It was betrayal, fear, and the shadows of everything Clara hadn't told him. Elliot walked back inside to find Clara sitting at the kitchen table, a piece of paper clutched in her trembling hands. She looked up as he entered, her eyes swollen from crying. "I wrote down everything," she said, pushing the paper toward him. He took it without a word, scanning the hastily scrawled details. Dates, places, snippets of conversations. Aaron's last name, Elliot's son. His gut twisted at the familiarity, Elliot's son. The name had cropped up in the news recently. Something about a small business owner involved in a scandal. Aaron Elliot's son, he muttered, committing the name to memory. Does he know about Lily's school? My work schedule? Anything else? Clara shook her head. I don't think so. I never told him anything about Lily. You think or you know? Elliot snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. Her flinch made him regret the tone, but not the question. There was no room for ambiguity now. I know, Clara said firmly, her voice trembling but resolute. I never talked about her with him. He doesn't know her school. I swear. Elliot nodded, though it did little to ease the knot in his stomach. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. I'll handle this, he said. But if he comes near this house again, you call me. Immediately. What are you going to do? Clara asked, her voice tinged with both fear and hope. I don't know yet, Elliot admitted. But I'm not waiting for him to make the next move. He left her sitting there and headed upstairs to check on Lily. She was still fast asleep, her small body curled around Mr. Flop. He sat beside her for a long time, his hand resting lightly on her back, grounding himself in the steady rhythm of her breathing. For Lily's sake, he couldn't afford to make mistakes. The next day, Elliot was up early, sitting at the dining table with his laptop and Clara's notes spread out in front of him. He typed Aaron's name into every database he could access, scouring news articles, social media, and public records. What he found only deepened his unease. Aaron Elliot's son was a personal trainer turned self-styled entrepreneur, with a reputation for charming his clients, especially the women. His Instagram feed was a curated collection of shirtless workout videos, motivational quotes, and pictures of lavish dinners that screamed success. But beneath the polished facade, the comments hinted at something darker. Mentions of unpaid debts. Cryptic warnings to stay away. A few deleted posts that referenced a history of violence. Elliot's phone buzzed. A text from Mark, got some info. This guy isn't just a problem, he's dangerous. Call me when you can. Elliot's stomach sank. Mark wasn't the type to exaggerate. He stepped into the garage, out of Clara's earshot, and called him back. Mark picked up on the first ring. Elliottson's bad news, he said without preamble. He's got a record, assault, intimidation, harassment. Nothing that stuck long enough to put him away, but enough to paint a picture. What kind of picture? Elliot asked. The kind where people get hurt if he doesn't get his way, Mark said. He's smooth. Manipulative. Knows how to play his victims against each other. Elliot's grip on the phone tightened. What about the threats Clara mentioned? Photos? I wouldn't doubt it, Mark said grimly. He's pulled similar stunts before. Blackmail, mostly. Keeps people scared and in line. Can you help me deal with him? Elliot asked, his voice low. I can give you advice, but don't expect me to come breaking down doors. That's not my line of work anymore. Then what do I do? Elliot asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Mark hesitated. Document everything. Record his threats if you can. If you confront him, do it in a public place where he can't try anything stupid. And for God's sake, don't go alone. Elliot hung up, a plan beginning to form in his mind. If Aaron wanted to play games, fine. But Elliot wasn't going to play by his rules. Not anymore. That evening, Elliot sat Clara down. I'm going to meet him, he said. Her eyes widened. Elliot, no. That's exactly what he wants. You'll only make things worse. I'm not letting him control our lives, Elliot said firmly. Not anymore. What if he hurts you? She asked, her voice breaking. Elliot met her gaze, his own steady. Then I'll make sure he regrets it. Elliot pulled into the parking lot of a dingy roadside diner on the outskirts of town. It was a quiet place, far from prying eyes but still public enough to keep things from spiraling into outright violence. He'd chosen the spot deliberately, knowing it offered a tactical advantage, an open layout with clear exits and a security camera overlooking the entrance. He checked his phone again, rereading the last message from Aaron. If you want to settle this, meet me. Come alone. Elliot scanned the lot. A few scattered cars sat under the dim glow of overhead lights. He recognized Aaron's black SUV parked crookedly in a corner spot, its polished exterior gleaming even in the murky night. Elliot stepped out of his car, his breath fogging in the crisp air. He had one hand in his jacket pocket, gripping the small recorder Mark had lent him. The other hand rested at his side, ready for whatever came next. As he approached the diner, the door swung open, and Aaron stepped out. He was taller than Elliot had expected, his frame broad and imposing. He was dressed casually, jeans and a leather jacket, but his swagger suggested he considered himself the most dangerous man in the room, no matter where he was. "You actually showed," Aaron said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. He smirked, his sharp features illuminated by the neon sign above the diner's entrance. "Didn't think you had the guts." Elliot stopped a few feet away, his posture tense but calm. "You said you wanted to settle this. Let's talk." Aaron chuckled, leaning lazily against the wall. "Talk? You think that's going to fix anything? Clara's mine, Harper. Always has been. You're just the guy she settled for when she got bored." Elliot's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain composed. "This ends now," he said. "You stay away from my wife, my daughter, and my home. Whatever you think you have over us, it's over." Aaron's smirk widened, his expression one of smug amusement. "You really don't get it, do you? I don't just have her. I own her. And if you think some little warning is going to scare me off, you're even dumber than she says you are." The words hit their mark, but Elliot didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice low and steady. "You don't scare me, Aaron. And you don't control her. Not anymore." Aaron's smirk faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "You think you're tough, showing up here, talking big? You don't know what I'm capable of." "I know enough," Elliot countered, his voice rising slightly. "I know about the blackmail. The threats. The lies you've fed her to keep her in line. And I know you've done this before. You think you're some kind of untouchable predator, but you're nothing. A coward hiding behind cheap tricks and empty threats." Aaron's expression darkened. He straightened, stepping away from the wall, his hands balling into fists. "You've got a pass-away wish, Harper." "Do I?" Elliot said, his tone icy. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the recorder. "Because I've got this. Every word you've said tonight. Every threat. It's all here." Aaron froze, his bravado slipping as realization dawned. "You think that'll stop me? You think the cops care about a little tape?" "It's not just the cops," Elliot said, his voice growing sharper. "You've made enemies, Aaron. A lot of them. People who'd love to see you taken down. And if anything happens to me, Clara, or Lily, this recording will go straight to them." Aaron took a step forward, his face twisted with fury. "You're bluffing." "Try me," Elliot said, standing his ground. "Because if you do, you'll find out just how much I've been holding back." For a long moment, neither man moved, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. Then, to Elliot's surprise, Aaron laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You think you've won, don't you?" Aaron said, his tone mocking but edged with frustration. "Fine. Have it your way, Harper. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." "It is for you," Elliot said. "Walk away, Aaron. Now. And don't come back." Aaron glared at him, his jaw clenched, before finally stepping back. He turned and stalked toward his SUV, muttering curses under his breath. The sound of his engine roaring to life echoed through the empty lot as he sped away, leaving Elliot alone in the cold night. When Elliot returned home, Clara was waiting in the living room, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She stood as he entered, searching his expression for answers. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's done," Elliot said, his tone firm but weary. "He's gone." Clara let out a shaky breath, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't deserve your help, but thank you." Elliot stared at her for a long moment, the weight of the night pressing heavily on his shoulders. "We're not okay, Clara," he said finally. "This doesn't fix what you did. But Lily deserves a safe home. And for now, that's all that matters." Clara nodded, her tears falling silently as Elliot turned and walked upstairs to check on Lily. He found her fast asleep, her tiny form curled under her blanket. As he sat beside her, watching her peaceful face, he felt the anger and pain inside him begin to ease, replaced by a fierce, unshakable resolve. Whatever came next, he would protect his daughter. No matter the cost. Weeks later, Elliot received a call from Mark. "You're not going to hear from Aaron again," Mark said, his voice carefully neutral. "Why?" Elliot asked, his stomach twisting. "Let's just say he ran into some trouble," Mark replied. "He's out of the picture. Permanently." Elliot didn't ask for details. He didn't want to know. All that mattered was that the threat was gone. As he hung up the phone, he looked out the window at the backyard where Lily was playing, her laughter filling the air. For the first time in weeks, the future didn't seem so uncertain. And for now, that was enough.